Hello, everyone. Hello and welcome. My name is Sarah Avery, and I am the Executive Director of Quanta Change. Thank you so much for joining me today. So, what I want to talk today about is about the issue that a lot of people have with not being able to trust themselves. And specifically here, when I say not being able to trust yourself, what I'm wondering is, do you experience being manipulated? Do you not trust yourself in terms of your judgment about other people and becoming involved with them in some way? So do you find yourself manipulated, deceived often, maybe duped or gaslighted perhaps? So gaslighting is when someone is manipulating you to question or distrust, mistrust your own judgment, your own perceptions, your own ability to reason something for yourself. And so have you learned about maybe red flags, warning signs about being manipulated? And yet, when you see one of those warning signs come up, then you sort of bat it away, you sort of put it to the side and think, no, really, it's all okay. So if that's the case, if you're keep continuing to find yourself in this situation where you're being manipulated often, or you have a pattern of being manipulated, you're not alone. I have helped so many people in my practice over the last 22 years with this particular issue, and I certainly have experienced it myself also. So what I want you to know is that there really is a way to see this pattern change and stop happening for you in a way that is detrimental to you. So if you haven't done some reading, if you're just hearing this and saying, wait, yes, I do have a pattern of being manipulated now that you say it. Gaslighting, yes, that sounds familiar. That sounds like a pattern in my life, but you haven't really looked into it. I would encourage you to do some reading, to do some looking around. There are lots of good resources. I know that there's even a podcast about gaslighting, for instance, lots of good books and other resources out there. So what researching this a little bit will do for you is to show you that it is a very common pattern. There are some really common red flags or warning signs that you can find, and it might help you really recognize the pattern in your life, going back perhaps further than you had realized. And that is kind of the first step to understanding what's been happening for you and getting rid of that pattern. So, but have you worked on this? Have you maybe learned the red flags that you're looking out for? Maybe you check in with friends before you say go down a road too far with someone in a relationship. Maybe you've done therapy or self-help work to try and stop this pattern from happening. Try and stop yourself from continuing to kind of fall for deception or manipulation. Has that worked? Has it helped? Hopefully it has. Hopefully you're not falling for that so often anymore. But if it hasn't helped, what I want you to know is that it's not your fault. And if it's not your fault, period. If this is you and you're feeling like I often have, like, wow, how could I be so stupid? Have you said that to yourself? I have said it to myself. How could I be so stupid? This is not a smart versus dumb thing in any way. This really, the fact that you have continued to find yourself in this pattern is really a function of your learned distress. And I'll explain what that is in a moment. But your learned distress can really create sort of an internal smokescreen, a switch that flips off your internal radar for recognizing that this is happening and stopping it from happening. So that's not something that has been in your rational control, and it's not your fault if it's continued to happen for you. And what I also want you to know is that, you know, there are absolutely people out there through their own learned distress who are predisposed to manipulating people for their own survival and that doesn't let them off the hook. That doesn't say, oh, it's all okay. They are fully responsible for that horrible behavior. And yet it helps us understand what's really happening and why this has continued to happen, kind of on both sides of the equation. But what we're concerned about today is you being able to stop having that happen for you in your life. So let me explain what learned distress is and how it keeps putting you in this situation. So learned distress is the Quanta Change term for the feeling that there is something wrong with you, being just the way that you are. You absorbed this feeling very early in life before you had any choice in the matter. And as you absorbed learned distress, your brain also developed a survival mechanism to allow you to cope with, to survive with that awful feeling, and to fit well with your parents, older siblings, other early caregivers in your life, kind of like fitting like a puzzle piece with them. And so sometimes we can see, even going back to very early in childhood, someone in your life who was manipulative like that, and then you keep falling into the same kind of relationship patterns with other people in your life. And that's where that pattern started. So the learned distress in this case, in this being manipulated case, has some really common elements to it that I have seen often. So one element is that your sense of I don't matter, the feeling that you don't matter, which is the biggest piece of learned distress for all of us, that tends to be buried. Your ability to sense the feeling that you don't matter is buried. And so when that's buried, it's really hard to sense when you're being mistreated. Along with the feeling that you don't matter being buried, so is maybe even deeper the feeling that you do matter. This is a core piece of your well-being, and it should be there to help you understand that you deserve to be treated well, that you deserve to have your needs met, including being treated with respect and honesty. And when you do matter, when that feeling is buried, your ability to express the fact that you matter and really assert that in the world tends to be shut down. And even if you do say, hey, wait a second, I don't deserve this kind of behavior. I matter here. I deserve to be treated with respect. When the feeling that you matter is buried in there because of learned distress, sometimes the response that other people have to you is, no, you don't. You don't matter. Because your feeling that you matter is so buried. And then the last element that I see here often is on top of all of that, of top of having I don't matter buried and I do matter buried, which really predisposes you to a lot of maltreatment by others. Then on top of that, your survival mechanism says, and I need to just say it's all okay. When it comes to other people and me in relationships, I just need to be able to say, or at least provide the illusion that everything is fine here. So that is a really tough combination, because your ability to know that you're being mistreated can be buried. Your ability to say, hey, wait a second, I matter, is buried. And on top of that, you just feel like you need to say, it's all fine, it's all okay, nothing bad is happening here, I'm fine, even when you're really not. So why is it? Maybe you've just heard everything I've said, and maybe you haven't heard it quite in the language I'm saying before, but you've heard it, you've worked with a therapist, or you've worked through some of this before, and you say, no, I know all this stuff, Sarah. I know all of this. So if so, why hasn't knowing that helped you to stop seeing this pattern happen? You're still finding yourself in relationships often with very manipulative people. Sometimes you're really still batting away. You're still burying the red flags and noticing those, and finding yourself over and over again in this awful situation. Why is that? Well, it's because learned distress is something that you can't think your way out of. There's actually sort of a wall of resistance to change. There's kind of a wall of protection around the sense of self, which stores your learned distress and your survival mechanism, that this wall of protection is activated when your rational brain is operating, which again, like I said, means that you really can't think your way out of your learned distress. So that's awful, and it makes for a very frustrating time, right? Especially if you've done a lot of work, a lot of studying, a lot of learning. But the great thing is that Quanta Change, this work that I do, was developed to get through that rational brain roadblock so that you can actually start peeling off layers of learned distress and your survival mechanism permanently, so that it doesn't keep creating this pattern in your life. So the way that Quanta Change does that, just briefly, is that it works with your brain during sleep. And there are two reasons for that. The first is that sleep is the time when your rational brain is entirely shut down. And so when the rational brain is shut down, so is that wall of protection around your sense of self that keeps you from really getting at that deep feeling level storage bank that's storing these awful feelings. And the other reason for working with your brain during sleep is that it's when your sense of self is getting recharged. So this sense of self storage container that stores how you feel is getting recharged when you sleep. And what Quanta Change allows you to do is tell your brain that you don't want to recharge anymore with learned distress, which is what you've been recharging with basically every night of your life. You want to recharge instead with this feeling at your core, your natural well-being, that is the feeling that you are just great being yourself, that you have everything you need, that you are already perfect just being yourself, that you know and you can trust yourself, and that you have everything you need within you to know what's right for you. So as you do that, as you recharge with well-being instead of learned distress, layers of learned distress come off permanently. They're peeled away, and your natural core well-being expands to take the place that that learned distress was sitting. And when we're talking about this issue of being manipulated in relationships, the main piece of learned distress that really expands and starts to really help out is that core feeling in you that you do matter, just for being yourself. And by extension, you deserve respect and to be treated well and to be treated honestly, all of those things. So here are some ways that Quanta Change tends to look in the general sense when you start unlearning this learned distress that disposes you towards being manipulated. So first, when that behavior happens again, someone starts to do something like that again, you have this sense of, hey, wait a second, that's not true. And you've never really known that before. You've maybe figured it out later, but you can sense it in the moment. You think, this is nuts. This is not true. Or you think, wait a second, that thing that you're trying to manipulate me into doing for you, that's not my responsibility. That's your responsibility. I don't have to do this. Or maybe you think, well, wait a second, what they're saying about me is not true. That's not who I really am. I know who I am. Or maybe you really feel like, hey, wait a second, I don't have to do things the way you're telling me, the way you're trying to manipulate me into doing. I get to do things my own way. And none of this is something that I sit down and plan out with my clients. What we really see is that this is spontaneous. In the moment, as this behavior is happening toward you again, you spontaneously are thinking, no, that's not happening again. I don't have to do this. I don't have to believe you. What you're saying is not true. You're manipulating me. You know it. Not that you've planned it out or you've figured it out or you've gone through a checklist. You just know inside yourself. And one more thing that tends to happen is if there's a kind of person who you've tended to be drawn to, maybe as a friend, maybe in a romantic relationship, maybe even in a work situation where you think, oh, that boss, that situation, that's the one I'm going to take. If there's that kind of person who you've been drawn to and then you keep finding out, Oh, another manipulative one, another gaslighter. What you'll find is that you don't have that natural draw to them anymore. In fact, you might see them from a mile away and think, no, not that one. And it's really different. I've experienced that for myself. The people I'm drawn to tend to be quite different. And when I do sense that someone is manipulative like that, um, if I can say no to that relationship, I do, of some sort, or if it's in some situation where it's in a group situation or a work situation, I have a stronger sense of myself. That feeling that I matter comes up and allows me to behave differently, allows me to take better care of myself in relation to that person. So let me give you a couple of examples from my clients over the years. To give you a better sense of what this can look like. So one client, this always happened for her in work situations. She always found herself with some kind of boss who was this type of gaslighter, manipulative, controlling sort of person. And especially because it was in a work situation, she often found herself feeling like, well, I need to be here. I need to be here for this job. And she would really sort of shut down her own radar for the behavior. She would push it away. She would say, you know what? Yeah, this was that once, but they probably aren't going to do it again. And especially the second that this person made a kind of nice gesture, behaved more, maybe normally, more respectfully, say, and showed her that they were capable of that, then she would just shut down the sense that they could ever do anything other than that again. She would say, okay, now it's all fine. They're going to treat me well from this point forward. And then you know what happened, right? They would behave the same way again, right? This is how they are. And she would just feel devastated all over again and triggered to feel not only like she'd been treated disrespectfully, but also she would take in a bit of their perception. She would feel like, wow, I really am not good enough. Um, I really, there's something wrong with me. So this kept happening. So she started to really unlearn some big layers of this. She had another couple of bosses situations where she was having to deal with a superior in some way in this situation, this kind of situation. And there were three main things that she saw as she started to unlearn learn distress. The first one is that well-being really started to show her what was real. Instead of falling for it, instead of saying, oh yeah, you're right, I should have, or something like that, she said, no, that's manipulation. That thing that they're trying to get me to believe, that's just not true. And she was able to really sense that and trust herself and her own perception more. The next thing that happened was some coworkers reached out to her and said, hey, we saw what happened to you there. And you know that person really tends to gaslight, right? You know that that's manipulative behavior, right? You know that, right? And so she started to get validation from the people around her who had experienced the same behavior from the same person. And that is one of those things that I see happen all the time with Quanta Change. Not only do your internal resources rise up to support you in a better way, but external resources can also show up to reinforce that. And the third thing that happened for her is that as that happened, instead of, because this person did keep behaving the same way. That's who this person was, this new boss. But my client said, wait a second, this is so weird. I see the behavior and it's still awful, but I'm not triggered in the way I used to be. I'm not crushed. I'm not buying into their perception of me. I know who I am and I don't have to buy that. There's behavior I have to deal with. I still have to have a working relationship with this person, but I don't have to buy into their manipulation anymore. So I hope that gives you a bit of hope if you have found yourself in that position of sort of turning your radar off again and again, shutting it back down, and then finding yourself back in the same situation, that really can change. The next example I want to give you is the kind of person who really feels responsible for other people, really needs people to like her, and feels responsible for them being okay, feels responsible for their stuff. This is my pattern of learned distress. I'm going to tell you about a client though. And so is this familiar? Do you feel like you get manipulated into other people's crises because you feel like, well, no, it's not about how I feel. It's just about, my gosh, look at what this person is going through. I better leap in and help them. And that person, some people are all too happy to manipulate you to leap in and help them more all the time, right? So this client was experiencing this. There was someone in her, quite a number of people in her close circle, or in her kind of larger family and friends circles that were like that. But she had this one person who, over the years, she had given substantial support to through many crises of this person's life. And it was never, ever enough for this person. This person never really came back and said, oh my gosh, thank you so much. I'm back on my feet. I'm back in a stable place again. Thank you so much. She never got there. She just kept going, here's the next crisis. What are you going to do about it, to my client? And, you know, it was exhausting to my client, but my client always felt like, well, but look at her crises. I better go help her. Is this familiar? Okay, so it gets worse for my client, because at one point, when this person perceived that my client hadn't done quite enough to jump in and help her at some certain point, this person started talking about my client behind her back in their larger friend circle. My client got wind of it, and she was really crushed, as you can imagine, because it's awful to have tried to help someone for quite a number of years and then have them saying, well, that wasn't enough, and actually she's really awful for not helping me more. And she started talking to her really close friends about this, and they were saying, you know, you are the only one who falls for her stuff. Everybody else sees through her. You know, she comes to you because you're the only one who will still help her. And my client started to unlearn. This is the place where it was a big trigger to really unlearn some of this stuff. And so as my client started to unlearn that, what she found was she spontaneously thought, wait a second, that really isn't my responsibility. I don't have to fall for this poor me story from this person. If she's gonna manipulate somebody to help her, she's gonna have to manipulate somebody else, because I am not doing this anymore. And this was not something she could have even imagined herself saying. It's not a response she'd ever had before to someone in that situation. So if you're the kind of person that I am, that she is, and you tend to find yourself just leaping in and helping the same person or the same kind of person over and over again in crisis, what I can tell you is that it really is possible to say, wait a second, that's really not mine anymore. And what that allows someone else to do, that person to do eventually, hopefully, is to find their own inner resources to start to really take care of themselves better, which is what full adults need to be able to do at some point. So I hope this has given you some sense that you do not have to continue in this kind of situation where you keep getting gaslighted, when you keep getting manipulated, when you keep feeling like, I just can't trust myself because I always end up in these situations. That really can change. So if that sounds interesting to you, the first way to find out if there's really something here for you with Quanta Change, that maybe Quanta Change could help you, the first thing to do is find out which pattern of learned distress and survival mechanism you have. Remember, I was saying that those are put into place by the time you're 2.5 years old, very early in life. And there's 6 basic patterns of learned distress and survival mechanism. And so you can find out for free which one of these patterns you have. They are called the idealist, the perfectionist, the optimist, the defeatist, the caregiver, and the dictator, or sometimes, not always, but sometimes that one is called benevolent dictator. So to find out which of these patterns you have, you can, well, let me say first that maybe you're thinking, oh no, not another personality test, Sarah. You know, I have dived into this stuff for years, decades. I know where this stuff comes from. I don't want to see another description of why I'm here. I want to change this. Well, this is the first step to changing it, because what you're going to find out by seeing your pattern of learned distress is what you're going to be unlearning through the Quanta Change process, what you are going to be peeling layers off of so that you can uncover your core well-being, that part of you that says, I do matter. I am okay just being myself. I deserve respect. I have everything I need. I can trust myself. I can trust what I know. So in order to get your pattern of learned distress, you're going to go to my website and click on the free report button to, you're going to fill out an in-depth, scientifically validated personality test that measures your learned distress. And I will send you this free report that shows you your pattern of learned distress, your pattern of surviving with it, and how Quanta Change tends to help people with that pattern of learned distress. So in order to do that, go to my website, quantachange.com, which is Quanta change.com, and click on the free report button, and I will send you your report. So I hope this has given you some hope that if you keep falling into this being manipulated, being gaslighted place that you feel like you can't trust yourself with in relation to other people, that really can change, because I've seen that for myself in so many of my clients over the years. There really is hope for this to change. So thank you so much for joining me today. And I hope that you will join me again next Friday for another way that Quanta Change really can help you feel good being you. Thanks so much.